Hey y'all, it's Mrs. D Green and I am back. Back to do the book review. Super excited, super charged up. I just left a panel with one of my favorite YouTubers, Andrew Gabor. Shout out to you. We got into a very heated discussion over what's recently been circulating in the news surrounding Real Housewives of Beverly Hills, aka the Bozema and Garcelle subliminals of it all. It's very disappointing, but we love Miss Garcelle. We love you. Thank you for paving the way for Bozema. Thank you for being the one to step onto that landscape and make room for other brown girls to go on that platform and, represent. I don't like what I'm seeing in the media, though. There seems to be a teardown, an attempted teardown of Bozema, and I think it's very sad, and it just shows you how far we still have to go as a collective, because some of the things I'm reading, they're sad. They're sad, but on a positive note, they have been promoting, because they're going to be airing the reunion, I believe, next Tuesday, because today is March 27th, so it's a Thursday. And so they're wrapping up the season, and, everyone's been making their rounds. Bozema was on Jimmy Fallon, and he loved her, as most of us who love her do. And, no matter what, I'm not going to bite that bait. I'm not going to bite the bait of two black women, race baiting each other into conflict. And I feel like that's sad. That's sad. But that's not what we're here for, right? I wanted to comment on that, because this is what's happening now in relation to Boz and the media with Real Housewives of Beverly Hills. So, we salute you, Boz. You keep going, all right? It's not going to be an easy ride, but you got supporters. All right, now, with that being said, we are here to review and discuss the book, The Urgent Life. We're going to be talking about chapters 8 and 9 tonight, the two chapters that delve more into her journey into motherhood. But before we get started, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and share, all right? Keep me going, okay? All right, so as you know, I have my notes. So if you see me, veering here and there, you know why. All right, so chapter 8 is called The Choice. Now, remember, we pick up at the end of chapter 7 when they found out they were pregnant with their first child, and they ended up naming her Eve. Before we get into the experience she had with that, as you know, she goes back and forth between time periods. So she starts out chapter 8 at the hospital, and she's recalling a time, I believe, she was recalling a time where she was in the hospital, and this is getting towards the near of the end. And she recalled a peculiar smell, and she likened it to a bouquet of flowers rotting away in a trash can or something like that. So she said she didn't understand, but if she smells something like that, it reminds her of death, because that's what came to her when she smelled it. And I thought that was very specific. Very specific. But I always like when people can tailor down, a thought and make it into a metaphor, and then something that small can have so much meaning, because I understand the context behind what she was saying. She's basically saying, in the way I interpreted it, is that smell, she wasn't sure if it was death, but she related it to that because it was sort of a sweet sour smell. It wasn't Peter, but it was a sweet sour smell, and it resembles what was going on in her life at that time. So, there could be poetic meaning behind everything if it's said right. Okay, but that's a tangent. Let's go ahead and get deeper into the chapter. So the next section of the chapter is she's talking about her pregnancy, and she actually mentioned how when she found out she was pregnant, she cried. She cried because she did not want to be tethered to the responsibility of having to always look out for someone else. She felt it would hinder her. And you know what? That's a real sentiment, A lot of mothers sometimes fear speaking about that, maybe fearing how they will be viewed. But I will tell you, as far as how I related to that, I'll never forget when I brought my daughter home and she was about 2 weeks old. And I was living in Spring Valley, San Diego, California. Shout out to Southern California, Spring Valley 91977. And I wanted to go to 7-Eleven. And I remember thinking to myself, my baby's 2 weeks and I'm at home alone with her. And I was like, wait, I can't even just go to 7-Eleven. I have to put her in the car seat and take her with me. So it's like down to that, like every move you think you're going to make, it does slow down. So I understood the fear in that because, you know, she was on the up and up with her career. She was very career forward, wanted to make a big splash, wanted to make a name for herself. So the fear in parenthood, motherhood slowing her down, I get it. But motherhood doesn't stop you, you know. Only the few and the blessed get gifted with that and they can still push through. So salute the moms, right? Salute the moms that still go out here and make it. So she said that she had complicated emotions because, like I said, she thought it would shrink her. But she had a doctor that cared for her throughout her pregnancy, and this is going to lend itself to a little bit more material in the book. So she mentioned the bedside manner and professionalism of this doctor and how sorry how this doctor, while they were the visits were pleasant, this doctor was friendly. She felt that this doctor was not stern enough and just didn't care for her as professional as she would have liked. This doctor did not give her the guidance she felt she needed, especially once she realized she was in a more delicate situation. So she mentioned things like how the doctor would always, you know, crack jokes and be so friendly to her. And yeah, while it has a smile on its face, it's no different than the medical field in total not hearing the cries of Black women and taking them seriously. So she likens that experience to that this doctor did not take her health into serious consideration and totally missed the preeclampsia, because that's what ended up happening to her and causing the issue in her pregnancy. She said her doctor took tests and did notice that she had low amniotic fluids and protein in her urine, but was not proactive enough to get her on a regimen to manage that. So it's like you're all smiles and giggles, but you're not doing what you need to do. And this is why it's so crucial for us to advocate for ourselves, because doctors like to think they're the second coming, and there's some people that make them think that as well. But doctors are humans. They make so many mistakes, and then they're protected. So you can't play around, even if they have an MD behind their name, you can't play around with fate just because you think this is the professional. So I have a personal experience with that. I don't want to talk about my situation with my miscarriage and death, but I just remember the doctor not being considerate of my emotions. And I just thought that was just so painful, because you're telling me the way you're talking to me, I understand you're coming off as a scientific person, but after bleeding for hours and hours and hours, and then I go to you and you can tell I'm distraught, you can tell I'm emotional. If you're not reading that, you're not showing up for me the way I need you to show up for me as a medical professional. Again, that's why we have to step in and advocate for ourselves. So when she was talking about that, that was, it was bringing back some old feelings, because this doctor, I was like, this alt-right Doogie Howser, I called him. And then it didn't help that my boyfriend, you know, he's a man, so I got two men in there. He's like trying to come to the defense of the doctor, because I was looking at the doctor like I was going to slap him into eternity based on how he was speaking to me and handling me, knowing that I'm in this state. It's like, you got to think, this woman has been miscarrying for 6 hours. There is an emotional and psychological buildup. So you need to handle that with care. So when she brought that bedside manner and professionalism, I was like, yeah, totally get her on that. So She said that she took her health serious though because of the experience she had in high school. But with her, taking the advice of that medical professional, she didn't think it was as dire as it ended up being. So she goes back to the time where she was working at PepsiCo. And PepsiCo was a large uh, campus that she worked on, so large that it had its own doctor's office on campus. So she said she went into the office, and God bless this woman, there was a colleague of hers named Melissa who noticed Bose didn't look well. And Bose, trying to power through and be her, her strong and going. So she downplayed it and said she was fine, but Melissa read in her, no, you're not fine, and insisted that she go, right? So she goes to the doctor on campus, and they also see that she's not well, but they don't want to worry her, so they're taking her vitals, they run some tests on her, and then they start asking her questions that caused her to kind of wonder, all right, well, what's going on? Panic if you must. And so she says that once she kind of got the feeling that it was an emergency and she was told that, she darted out of that doctor's office, drove to her primary care physician. They had alerted her doctor. So as soon as she arrived on site, they actually had a wheelchair waiting to usher her in. Now, mind you, she's only 5 months pregnant at this point. So she started swelling up and it was becoming very critical. They're calling everyone to the hospital. Peter shows up and it just becomes chaotic. So she's forced to deliver the baby, but there was an exchange between her, the doctor, and Peter as to if you had to make a choice, who would you choose? Would you choose the baby or would you choose Bozoma? And of course, Bozoma, not thinking straight naturally, but being protective as a mother, she opted to choose the baby. So she was going to sacrifice her life for the baby. And of course, Peter wasn't going for that. So there was a discussion between Peter and the doctor. And I guess Peter, had the final say as her husband, or at least had some input. And due to her condition, I'm sure they decided to go with whatever it was he discussed. So she says, she delivered Eve, and this part was real emotional. Eve survived a little bit, but then she passed, and so they had to reckon with that. And she mentions how it was bittersweet because everybody was there to celebrate the birth of Eve, and ended up coming to the hospital to prepare for a funeral. And so she says it was so traumatic, and she couldn't let Eve go. She held Eve in her arms and could not give her up. And the nurse, they're asking to take her, and she didn't want to give her up, and she ended up having to give Eve to Peter, and then Peter handed over Eve to the doctors, and they took care of that. So yeah, she went through a couple of situations where she was constantly reminded of that loss and the trauma associated with it. That's a lifelong trauma she's going to live with. She's going to grieve that forever, because to carry a child and connect with them, and then you birth them, and then you hold their lifeless body in your arms. Oh, I couldn't even imagine. I mean, I still am traumatized from my miscarriage. So if you birth a child and then they're stillborn, my heart goes out. My heart goes out to any woman that's gone through that. We go through so much, don't we? So she said that she went back to work after, I believe she said 3 weeks, which is not enough time. But, it's not that you want to run from the pain. That's essentially what you're doing. But it's not that you want to run. It's you want to pick up the pieces, because if you're a driven person and you expect so much of yourself and you hold yourself to such a high standard, you adopt this mentality of, well, life goes on, and Bose is especially like that, because she's of the mindset that no one's a victim. We're all victors, right? We're all meant to be challenged. So I can understand why she went back, but as life will remind you, we are human. So she goes to work, and she recalls when the nurse said that her milk was still going to come in, even though, the baby got lost because the body just recognizes the hormones that there was a child in there and now the child is out. Now we have to produce, we have to lactate. So her milk started to come in, and that was triggering because it reminded her of something that she couldn't give. And then she says that there was one time she was at her desk and a colleague that had not heard of what happened just happened to walk over to her desk and start asking her questions about the baby and how she was doing. And Bozoma says she couldn't take it. She left that day. And so she says that she took an additional 6 weeks to kind of, take time for herself, but she barely left her apartment. So, yeah. She says at the funeral, they wore tan. Well, she wore tan in honor of Eve because when her and Peter were baby shopping and picking clothes, they were picking neutral colors, and tan was one of them. Side note, if you happen to go onto her company's website, which is Eve by Boz, that's her hair company, you'll notice that the color scheme has tones of beige and brown and tan and brown. So that just reminded me of how intentional she is, and she really dedicated that business to her daughter, because that's why she did it. She named it after her firstborn daughter. So yeah, this part it's a little heavy, so I'm going to put a trigger warning on the video when I upload it, as I did for chapters 4 and 5, because it deals with sensitive topics. So she said that she ended up cremating Eve, and she found a little urn and a necklace, and it was green and shaped like a heart, and she wears that has Eve's ashes in there. She says that now this is when the cracks began to deepen in the relationship. She said that every time she looked at Peter, she blamed Peter, like she held him responsible for the decision behind Eve, and they could never come back from that because she feels like he made a decision for her on her body and cost her her child. Now, I'll admit, Bozoma may have been being a little bit unreasonable, and naturally, she's just gone through something so traumatic. So the nearest people to you are going to catch the strays. But in Peter's defense, I could also understand Peter just trying to be a protector and a husband and do what he thought was best at the time. So it's really sad that they weren't able to fully recover from that before Peter, like losing time and then having to be forced to get back together due to Peter dying, because now they've lost more time. So just like Boz, you have to learn to forgive. I'm sure she had to learn to forgive. I myself was in that situation, my husband and I, before he passed, because if you have listened to any of my recaps, you know that I am a widow. But if you don't know, again, Bozoma and I have similar stories. So I do apologize if I relate a lot to what she's gone through, but down to like mostly everything, we're like neck and neck. I just haven't achieved this financial success yet. I will be getting there though, and I haven't written my book yet, but I will be getting there. But back to the story. So my husband, before he passed, we were estranged for 3 years, same amount of time as they were, and he had done something that I was not able to forgive him for. And so I emotionally detached, and we were starting to slowly get back, but we could never get back before he was abruptly killed. So as she's telling that story, I go back to, you just never know how much time you have with people. So try to forgive, or at least close out things properly, make your endings ended and not live in that state of purgatory, because it robs you of so much time that you can have with someone that you love so much. So she says that the feelings ebbed and flowed for them, and they went into this uneasy quiet within their marriage and their home. So it was then when she started to realize that it was over, but she wanted to give it a little bit more time. So Peter suggested therapy. They attended therapy, and they aired out their grievances in therapy. And Peter wanted to repair the marriage. Well, Bozoma, she wanted to get pregnant again. So they both had their individual trauma responses to the experience. Peter definitely being scared because doesn't want to go through that again, and knowing how much of a toll it took on her body, he didn't want to subject his wife to that again. God bless him. May he rest in peace. And then Bozoma, I get that trauma response too, because when I had my miscarriage, and I'm sure women that have miscarried and had stillbirths, you have all types of trauma responses, but I'm going to go on record and maybe say that one of the responses is you want that feeling again of motherhood, right? You want that spark. You want that moment of excitement. And so that was one of mine I had. My trauma response was I consistently took pregnancy tests. So I was ordering them in bulk on Amazon, and I would take one maybe once a week because, my ex and we were still getting it on, and we were still kind of like silently trying. We hadn't declared to try again, but we were like trying, because men don't always articulate what they want, but I believe he wanted it because we were, like I said, we were getting it on, and I wanted that feeling again. I wanted to see that pregnant digital answer pop up on the screen. I wanted to see those 2 lines again. I longed for that. So that was another thing I could identify with her on when she said that she just wanted to immediately get to it. She started like really monitoring her body, taking her temperature, hopping on Peter every chance she got. And a couple months later, they were pregnant with their second daughter, Lael. And that is when it goes into chapter 9. So, chapter 9 is titled The In-Between. Now, in this chapter, she speaks about the experiences of now having a child, but everything she went through in that pregnancy, and then things that she went through eventually with Peter afterwards, that ultimately led to them making the decision to separate. So, as always, she goes back and forth between time periods. She starts out chapter 9 with Peter getting closer to the end. And she remembers her sister's friend, Magda, being in town. Her sister, Alua, being in town and visiting. And so she recalls the adage of when there's more than one person in the room, that means God's around. So they came up with the idea to do a vigil, like just pray over Peter, just really, invoke the presence of God and just ask God to heal him and just bring this cancer, take this cancer away from him, give him a second chance. They tried everything. She even tried to get Peter involved to give his input and have him, surrounded in it, but he was just too weak to do it. So she tried to do it for both of them, and then she became too overwhelmed, and she had to put an end to it. So we all know that, you try to do as much as you can. You try to have as much hope as you can in a hopeless situation. But once you realize that it's beyond your control, there's peace in kind of releasing too. So I think Bozoma had just come to terms that this is what it was, and released. So they stopped the vigil. So she goes back to a time where she speaks about her relationship with God and how she felt her and God were homies, so she felt God owed her one, which, hey, claim it, own it. That's right. Declare your relationship with God. Be bold in your belief. And she said that if God were going to bless her, with this baby, she would be super vigilant about it. And she was. So with this pregnancy, she just didn't go with what doctor she got and how the doctor advised her. In fact, she said she combed resources, looked into what her condition was, and looked at a demographic that was common for. So I believe she mentioned that there were Ashkenazi Jewish women that she had done a research and found this was a common thing with, and she sought out doctors that specialized and worked with those groups, which was good because turns out that for Bozoma, carrying is difficult. She does get the preeclampsia. Her blood pressure spikes, and the protein in her urine, it happens. So this doctor was able to mitigate that early. So the doctor put her on medicine, which she had to inject into herself daily. And she says at first she, you know, because people are scared initially, I can imagine, to inject themselves with medicine. So she said initially she asked Peter, and Peter was like, no, like, you know, it was a struggle for like 3 hours, that initial dose. And then she finally just took matters into her own hands and started injecting herself. She doesn't say why she chose injection instead of like an oral form, but that's what she had to do. But she got ahead of it before it could progress into something worse. So she said she had a pretty good pregnancy, and then she recalled one time though where she had a scare. Sorry, my booty was hurting because I'm on this bench. I mean, not this bench, this stool. She says she recalls one time where it was Christmas and she was going to Florida and she was pregnant, and she had a little bit of spotting, and she was advised to have a blood pressure cuff. So she checked her blood pressure all the time. But even though she was being hyper vigilant and checking for everything, she feared going to the doctor whenever the doctor would say come into the office, because it took her back to that time where things got bad, and then she went to the doctor, and then she ended up having to deliver Eve stillborn. So she didn't want to go through that again. So she would resist going to the doctors when they called her in. So it was mixed feelings. On one hand, you're being hyper vigilant and staying on top of your body, but on the other hand, you don't want to be met with the trauma, you know, if it does end up being worse. So that's got to be hard, right? That's got to be hard. So now she said that Peter's hypervigilance, though, because he was also hypervigilant, kind of made her feel uneasy and stressed her out even more, because he was like all over her for everything. She said she had odd cravings. One of the cravings she had was real spicy food, and she would eat it and it would get the baby worked up. So she, you know, in relation to that craving, that wasn't so bad. But another craving she had was she still liked alcohol. She liked the taste of alcohol. So Peter got her a non-alcoholic beer, and she would drink that. And then her doctor advised her that she could have 1 glass of red wine a week. So she would enjoy that. But she said when she enjoyed that, when she had her glass, she felt like Peter was judging her. So it was kind of like, I mean, I get both of them. They just went through so much. And so both of them are going to have their own, you know, reaction and just way that they feel they have to protect what's going on. But it's just sad that it was what broke down their marriage, because they both were victims of that. So I just wish there could have been a little bit more love, and that's easier said than done. And I'm sure she thinks this too, but it gets me to reflecting again on how life is so short. So, you know, you really got to, as I was reading these chapters, like peel back the authentic layers in being a complicated woman, right? You know, that is like snubbed. Like it's not allowed, especially if you're a Black woman. So the fact that she's showcasing how, yes, I was difficult. Yes, I was selfish sometimes. Yes, I was stubborn sometimes. But what I also like to hear is how Peter loved her through that. He loved her through that. This was a testament of how much he adored her, and that's the kind of love you want. You know, you want your man to love you no matter what state you're in, right? So there's the beauty, at least in that aspect. So she said that the time came where she hit about, oh, no, this is before, sorry. So she says that when she got to about 5 months pregnant, the doctor wanted her to go on bed rest because of her preeclampsia. So of course she went on bed rest. But then at about 7 months, that's when the condition started to worsen. So of course she's scared, but you know, you have to go. Like the pregnancy is further along, so you can't run from that. So she goes to the hospital, goes through the same chaos, but at this time there was a successful delivery. Lael was born. She did notice, because Lael was premature, that there were some things that were not like fully developed. So she said when she saw Lael's heartbeat, like she could see it because Lael was so pale, like her color hadn't fully come in because she's still developing. She said her nails hadn't fully come in. She was only 3.4 pounds, so they had to wait until she hit about 5 pounds before she could leave the NICU. She was in NICU, and she spoke about how being in NICU was, and I've never been to NICU, so thank God, but the way she described it, she said it's, when you're there, it's the saddest, one of the saddest, and it'll take you through a tailspin of emotions. So there's babies there, right? But she said that you wouldn't always hear crying. Or let's say there was a baby there one day, you know, the baby, if the baby was gone, you would hope that the baby was able to go home, right? Because you just never know. But the fact that you are having those complex of emotions and that worry in what is supposed to be such a joyous time, like that sentiment alone is draining, and it's like you have to power through that. So I myself would, I don't know if I could handle that. You know, God doesn't give you what you can't handle, but like I was putting myself in her shoes, and to have to always show up, and then you just never know, or is this going to be the day? And then, you know, you can only stay there for so long once you're discharged. So she said sometimes she would, they had visiting hours, and sometimes she would fall asleep and pretend she was in a dead sleep so they wouldn't make her leave, and so that she could spend the night. She says also she would call sharply at 6 because they opened at 6 to check on Lael. And she says she recalls a few of the times where she would visit Lael, and she noticed already that Lael had a fighting spirit. Lael was crying, pulling on equipment. There was one time where the lights got into her eyes, and she was freaking out about that. Bose was. But Lael just powered right through that. She had a fear that Lael was going to be blind because of that. But again, Lael just fought through every adversity that was thrown at her at 7 months old. And so she said once she saw that, they gave her strength and just the peace that her daughter was also a fighter like her mom. So she says now once Lael became able to go home and she brought her home, now this is where the fractures began to deepen between her and Peter. So she says that she was so overprotective and he was so overprotective, but it was like a competition. So she says that she did this thing where she called it kangaroo time, where she always nestled Lael into her breast, you know, to breastfeed her, and drew her close to her so they can bond. Well, when Peter would try to do it, Lael didn't like it because Peter's chest was hairy. So Peter suggested, well, what if I put a blanket in between me and her so that she's not irritated? So then Bose would say, well, that defeats the purpose, and then take Lael right from him. So you can imagine that caused divide, because it's almost like she was always infringing on his time to bond with Lael because she wanted to have that all to herself. And she admits that she was being selfish, but given what she had gone through, she just didn't want to take that chance, and she wanted to cherish her baby as much as she can. Like, their marriage went through so much, and, you know, reading how much he loved her and just what they went through and the toll it took. I know Bose, just like she's haunted by Ben's death, I know this is something that haunts her. So when I see her now and I see her just pushing, like, she's strong, but I know there's a lot going on under there. But it's fierce, and it's powerful, and it's what you want to see. You want to see a woman like pushing forward, and that's why it breaks my heart. It breaks my heart that this woman is being persecuted right now and judged in the media the way that she is, given the fallout. And it's like, man, like, we got to respect each other's stories and just uplift each other. Like, some of the things people are saying about her, they're calling her coon. They're just, I'm like, God, like, we're never happy. Discrediting her career, calling her an influencer that just so happened to make it in corporate America and leverage her being an influencer. And it's like, God, like, you just makes me look at people like, get some happiness in your life. Get some fulfillment. always quick to critique. Sorry guys, I was so fired up. Like if you follow Andrew Gabor, it's his video that he posted on March 27th when he's speaking about Garcelle and Bozoma and the pitting against each other within social media. And so you will hear some of the very passionate and heated discussions within that. And I did take place, and I'm sorry if, you know, you look at me differently when you hear some of the stuff I said, but I stand true on what I believe. And yeah, we got a windmill for each other, don't we? All right. So she says that they started to realize, at least for her, that their apartment they had so many emotions within the walls, and it was beginning to take a toll. So they thought, well, maybe if they changed their scenery, that would help them. It would breathe life back into their marriage, bring life back into their new situation, you know, just give them a breath of hope, like, you know, just some reprieve after everything they've been through. And so they put their apartment on the market and moved to, I think it was Edgewater, New Jersey, into a 3-bedroom townhome. And so she said there they were able to do things that they hadn't done before, like enjoy the city in a different light now as a family. They had even done things that they never done before while they were living there as singles and even as a couple. So it did bring, you know, brought a little bit of a good feeling for a little while, but couldn't cover up the crack, because she also said that every time she saw Peter, she thought about Eve, and she could not forgive him for that. So I did highlight a section in chapter 9. It's on page 190. It's between 190 and 191. And so let me read it. She says that she's talking about 2 friends of hers that were, they eventually separated, but her and Peter noticed the tension between them. They would argue a lot. And so she's talking about how she started to see parallels in them. Not that her and Peter argued a lot, but the body language and the tension and the anger, she definitely started to see that her and Peter were a version of that. So she says that Peter and I didn't bicker with their frequency or ferocity, however you pronounce it. But I felt we were slowly becoming like them. People who were more at peace when they were apart than when they were together. Tethered more by habit and obligation than passion. We were becoming those people we'd never imagined we'd be. We're a lot like Carrie and Artie, I said to Peter one night after we'd sat in silence for most of the evening. Half the time we don't have anything really to say to each other. Peter shrugged. Well, he said, picking up the remote, my parents sometimes go a whole day in the same house without talking. And most of our friends argue, just like Carrie and Artie. Maybe that's what marriage is. I was dumbfounded. Was that what he was willing to accept? I wanted butterflies and romance. I knew that wasn't realistic to have all the time, but I wanted to feel that giddiness more days than not. I hear you, especially when you've already suffered loss and you had the scare. It's like you don't want to compromise having joy, as much joy as you can maintain, and peace in your life, just out of obligation. Now it becomes struggle love. No one wants struggle love out of obligation and loyalty. There has to be some work. There has to be some action to change that. So she said she was frustrated, unsatisfied, and she knew she did not want to whittle away her life waiting for the next extraordinary moment, because she mentions how big events started to mean a lot to her because she was able to experience joy. And so, you know, she said you had to live and try to be happy in the in-between all of those moments. So the day-to-day. And I'm with her on that. I understand. She said she didn't know how she could tell Peter, but she was beginning to realize she wanted out. That was me in my last 2 relationships. So like I said, with my late husband, that was me the last 3 years. But because I had grown up in a single parent home, and it put so much stress on my mother, and that was just a common thing, you know, in my community. Father absence is a big issue. I did not want to subject my daughter to that. So I was going to thug it out until she turned 18. But there was a part of me that died in the process of that. Like, this is when I started picking up the weight. I was almost 300 pounds. I wasn't taking care of myself. We weren't having sex. So I was eating, eating and just pouring myself into everything that I could other than my marriage. But a part of you does die when you do that. So when I was reading that, I was like, yes, that is a definite truth. Then the second part, and this is on page 192, and this takes me to my recent relationship that I had to end. So she says she was no longer the same person Peter met in a cafeteria 10 years before. I was a woman who now knew what it was to face death and constant crippling fear. And yet I didn't want Lael to grow up knowing this version of me, the version that was frightened and unsure. I wanted her to know the Bose who headed to New York with barely any money in her pocket, certain that she could carve her future into the shape of her dreams. Somehow, I knew she'd never know that person if I stayed. I didn't know how to get that person back without leaving Peter. Years later, looking back at that interruption and the precious time it cost us, I still respect my decision, because ultimately you have to live in your truth, even when it breaks two hearts. And at that moment, I felt I had to leave so I could continue to breathe, so I could continue to be. And so in my recent relationship, that's what it was. So he and I had come together, and I'll be honest, I'll be so real with you. My late husband was Scottish American, and my recent guy, he was Black, right? So I was like super focused on Black love, super focused on putting on that cape. I had been out of the dating scene for 10 years. I was listening to the narrative. I saw the narrative. I lived it, of Black men not feeling valued, Black men not feeling respected, Black men not feeling heard, Black men, the things that they deal with in society and how it takes a toll on them. So I was very mindful of the brokenness that could be of a Black man that was coming out of adverse situations and just had a hard life. And I did see that in this person. He was a victim of a lot of no one's a victim, but he had been subjected to a lot of things that he had not healed from. And so he was bringing that toxicity into our relationship. And, that cape, I began to want to rip it off, because I too, along with my daughter, had gone through things. And I just was not going to subject myself to someone's abuse, their verbal abuse, their emotional abuse, because they didn't want to do the work. I didn't want to lose the Dwayna that I had developed into, because like I said, I too had gone through loss. Now, I had 2 losses within a year and a half period. I lost a husband and I lost a pregnancy. And so I'm dealing with so much, yet you expect me to shoulder your emotional burdens. And mind you, this man hadn't even promised not pregnancy, but longevity in a real way. So that was another thing. I'm not about to sit here and sacrifice myself if you're not even willing to give the same investment that I wanted to give. So I was totally with Bozoma on that, because the same narrative, the same, things out there is you have men saying how women give up on them, how women don't, they don't have patience. It's like, no, we don't have patience for struggle love. We don't. Do the work, straighten up, love us right. We all go through things in this society, and a woman does not want to be your punching bag. Okay? Just like you don't want to be her punching bag. So there has to be accountability on all parts. But that's a soapbox for another day. So yeah, as you can see, she's getting really real about the breakdown and the experiences she's had. And I appreciate, again, her showing up on my radar the way that she did, because it's almost like she's telling my story too, like she's articulating. Like, I got a little differences in there, but my recent life over the last 10 years is that of Bozoma's. So I encourage you, pick this up on, I ordered it on Amazon, so it is available on Amazon, and Barnes & Noble carries it as well. But if you're not a reader, because not everyone is a reader, some people, they prefer auditory, things. If you just want to listen to it, listen to the reviews as well, okay? I hope you have been enjoying them, and I would love to hear your opinions on what you've heard so far on the book, right? So, With that being said, please like, comment, subscribe, and share. Again, this is your girl, Mrs. D Green, and I really appreciate the support and the engagement. Till next time, my friends. The chapters. So the next chapters we're going to recall before I end it. We did 8 and 9, so we're going to do 10 and 11 next. And then after that, we're going to do chapter 12 and the acknowledgments, because the book is 12 chapters. So look for that. Hopefully I'll have that up in the next 2 weeks or so we could put an end to this, because I'm going to start recapping Wendy Osefo's book. I already read that, but that's an interesting book because it talks about her experience being a child of Nigerian immigrants and the things that her mother went through, and it helps you understand Wendy a little more. Wendy's definitely a controversial character that some favor, some don't, but look into her story and maybe you'll understand her a little better. All right? Now, like I was saying before, till next time, my friends, peace and blessings. Bye.